Hello, my name is Carlos Perez. I'm a software engineer, and I'd like to welcome you to this serverless tutorial where I'm going to be covering a very common task that a lot of corporations have the need, especially if you're working with third parties or different vendors. We're going to use a fan out pattern where essentially we are going to be sending data through a single endpoint, and then we use the pub/sub pattern to send the data almost instantly to different data providers. For this demonstration, I'll use perhaps a blog, write a blog to a queue storage, and maybe we have some time for a SQL. The idea behind this is pretty consistent, it's the same. So if you learn one, then you should be able to just kind of understand how you can create additional subscriptions to obtain the same data. Please take your time. I added some notes here based on research and some benchmarking, as far as cost and throughput and scale, how scalable this solution is. Very amazing that at the end of the day, I only had to write one single line of code, and I was able to push data across different providers with just a single endpoint. That's pretty amazing. So I'll show you how to do this from scratch, and what I'll do is just, we'll go back and switch to the portal. Before we start, the first thing you need to keep in mind that I'm going to be utilizing this tool on that tool service. It's called Event Grid. And to do that, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that your service is rich. Your subscription is have this provider enable register. So if you go on the resource provider under your subscription, you can research for the Event Grid service, and you just make sure that the status is registered. If it's not, just click on the top left button. So with that, I want to start from scratch. So I want to create, let's say, I'm going to utilize this alias called Apri just for a company name, just assuming this is the company resource. It's going to be based on East Coast, and I'm just going to hit create. All my resources are going to be created in this group. Excuse me. So first most important, I want to be able to start creating resources. So what I like to do is, let's say we're going to create a single storage account that's going to go to my group. And we're going to call this one Apri storage, something that we can always recall back, storage. And the goal here is going to be that we're going to have this storage, we're going to say files to the blog, this is files to the queue, by just adding a subscription. I'm going to speed up the video a little bit here so we can save time. So when we create resources, please don't mind if I speed it up. So if you go back here to my resource group, the first thing we did was just create it in a storage account. Okay. Now, the event grids is very powerful. So what I might show you guys is the basic and the advanced portion of this. So I am creating a logic app now because what I want to demonstrate is how you can trigger built-in functionality within the event grids. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to create a very basic logic app where I'm going to be triggering some of this event, and I'll be able to see the activity. The goal for now is just to understand the basic functionality, what happens behind the scenes when you create an event grid. So if I go back again to my resource groups, so far what I've done is created a storage in a logic app, right? So inside the blog, we're going to create a folder, and let's just call this one Ingest. Okay, Ingest because it makes sense, right? I have this weather file. I'm going to be using some dummy data from the weather API, and we're going to try to, anytime that we get a new file with new weather, right, we're going to essentially save that data into a file, and it's going to come to this ingest folder. Okay. For now, again, I'm just trying to demonstrate how you can understand some of the connectors that already have event grids, and they already have built-in functionality. So if I start with just a blank solution, right, and I search for let's search for event grid itself. Let's see what comes out here. All right, so if you want to utilize any functionality that is out of the box, you want to use Azure Event Grid. Okay, with this, you don't have to worry about resources, namings, and topics. It's all done for you in the back scene. But I think it's kind of cool if you learn how to do that yourself. So we're just going to walk through the easy path, happy path I call it, and you can sign in with your current subscription. And what you want to do now is make sure you fill in the subscription, the resource type. In my case, this is going to be in a storage account, right? That's what we're trying to automate. We are saying that whenever there's a new file created in this storage, right? Here you have to select the resource group. If you recall, let me see for a second, make sure I'm in the right place. The storage account, yep. And then resource group should be Happy storage account, which is the one we just created. Right. So here's the events, right? Okay. So what kind of events do you have? You can think of this like listeners. Okay. When the file is created, when the file is deleted. If you come from programming background, this shouldn't be much of a challenge. These are listeners that you are attaching to a particular folder, if you want to think. So whenever there's a file created in this folder, which is called container, we're going to do something. All I want to do now is just walk you through manual process. And to make this easier, I'm just going to create a new tab. I'm going to be switching between the two tabs so that it makes it easier. Once you do that, what I want to do is go back to this one, kind of refresh my resource groups. And you can see all these hash resources that were created. This is because we utilize in the auto built-in functionality. But we'll touch on that a little bit later. And what I want to do now is, you can see here, there's no files, right? And if I go back to my Logic app, the goal is going to be that whenever I loop a file, I want to make sure that there's some activity that happened here, okay? And this is just going to prove that the built-in functionality works. Of course, you can add different logics, like send emails or send the data across different places. And by the way, these are my videos, so if you're interested, now you know. You can see here I created a file. So what just happened, right? Well, if you recall, we added an event that is kind of monitoring whenever there is a file created, we're going to see it, some activity. Not much to show, but the point here is that I'm going to try to add another file, is that you have to understand that Event Grid has built-in functionality right out of the box. And also there's a functionality where you can customize different advanced patterns so that you can have more flexibility and perhaps more control by calling the resource with more conventions needed, depending on the project you're working on. Let's go back here and let's make sure that we refresh here. You can see now 2 files were uploaded. This is no code. It's just basically monitoring that whenever there is a new block created, it's going to trigger the Logic app automatically. Very cool. I think the next step is going to be taking the same fundamentals, right? We wanted, I'm just going to keep my storage. So I'm going to delete all the other resources because, as you can see, these are hashable. These resources were created automatically. I had no idea what I was doing, but it just kind of automatically created it for me, right? If we go look at this subscription, for instance, you can see here, this is a topic that I already had this subscription at the bottom, but you had no idea what the subscription does, right? So my goal is to show you guys that you can control that and you can kind of create your own subscription with something more meaningful. That's the key part here. You can create something with more meaningful naming conventions, that you have some sort of action that you're trying to achieve. So let's do that. Let's just go ahead and delete these resources. I am just going to keep the storage account. And we pretty much starting from scratch, right? So this is the second part of this demo where I want to make sure I can show you how you can fan out to different data providers. Let me see. So maybe we can start with the Event Grid. So what Event Grid does, what other options do we have? So if you go in all services and you search for Event Grid, let me try this again. create a new resource. This is what we want. Create a new resource. You search for event grids. You'll see all the options, right? And the one I'm interested in is I want to do a pub sub. So a topic is what you want to do. Please, I definitely advise to read a little more about. It'll make more sense about pub subs. It's highly used in microservices. So what I want to do here is resource group, and I want to use a name that I can relate to what I'm trying to achieve. In this case, for the purpose of the demonstration, I'm going to have a weather event, right? We're going to get a new weather file. Every time I get a new weather file, I want to populate this data to different locations, different data providers. I do want to stay close to my region. In this case, I want to consistently stay with East Coast. It will be consistent with my project. And let's just create it. Let me change the name here. Okay, created that. So what we have now is basically a topic, right? Let's review our resource group. So if we take a look at resource group, we should have a topic and we also have a storage. So let me refresh this. Here it is. Now that we have a topic, and then how do we get data across different places? Remember, a topic is something that gets internally within Azure, right? It's centralized to the Azure resources. So for instance, what I want to do is have a central, I'm just going to create a logic app that I can send data to. Again, this is just a demonstration, right? This can be other resources, or I just want to be able to push from data from Postman, right, which represents a client code. This can be also a redirect from another API. But I just want to call it something send weather, right? And I'm going to use Postman, so you're not just so tied into Azure portal. I want to start demonstrating that you can also, this can be a code that depends from an external resource, which is typically the real scenario, right? There's data coming from different vendors, and you want to be able to process this data. So let me go back here. So again, we just created a send weather. There's nothing attached to these logics yet. And what I want to do now is really expose an endpoint. Let's say we do on receiver request. All I want to do is take this request, and just to keep it simple, we're just going to add a new event grid, right? We're going to take the request that goes to use the publish event grid, right? Instead of using the event grid, we're going to use the publish version. And this is just the pub sub pattern. This will be a publisher. And the connection name can be some convention that you can utilize to identify the entities needed for your projects, right? So new weather sounds like a good thing here. So remember topics. Topics is just an endpoint at the end of the day. So if we go back and take a look at the topic endpoint, which is the event grid that we created, there is usually under the overview tab. Let me go back. I need to refresh my resources. Oh, here it is. So new event weather, which is the one to create. You see the topic endpoint. This is what they're asking for here. It's basically asking, hey, where's your publishers? And if you're going to create a publisher, I need to know what your topics is. Those kind of go together. So this is what they're asking for. And you're also going to need a access signature key, which is also found at the same portal location where I just got this event. So let me go back. Let's go back to the same page. And if you go to the access key, you can just copy one of these. And again, you're in the topic, you go to access key and just copy one of these. And this is what pretty much they're asking for this connection. I always like to think of these requirements as you creating a unique connection to a resource, right? So once that connection is established and validated, right, you get these additional dialogues. ID, essentially these are requirements that most have in order to maintain the topics. And the nice thing about Azure, they give you all these expressions built-in functionality. Again, you're not writing code. This is going to automatically generate random numbers in hashable manner. So Subject and event type, I just call them the same, new weather file. You can think of an email coming into your inbox and it has a new weather file that you just publish into different publishers, so to different clients. So there's this thing also called dynamic content where you can actually see that you can export it from the body. What I'm doing here is saying, hey, from the request received, I'm going to take the body and I'm going to persist the data into this subscription, into this publish event. Now, by saving it, you now can see that there's a post request that you can utilize. Again, I am using this, and I'm going to just use it for Postman. I had set this up already. And you can see here, I pasted it, I made it a post, and I literally copy and pasted some weather from the weather API sample code, sample JSON. And the goal is to make the simulation that I am receiving a new file or someone else is sending me data through my services, and I want to be able to do something with the data. In this case, I want to ingest this data across different data providers. So what I like to validate also, I go back to my logic app. I do want to see some activity. This is always something I recommend you guys when you guys are developing serverless. Do baby steps and make sure you validate as you're making progress with some of this logic. So I sent it once, there's no errors. Let me send it a couple times more. See here, 3 times. So if you go back and refresh the activity, you can see now that there's 3 events that just got triggered. Again, this is just demonstrating that there's something happening whenever my endpoint is being triggered, right? But we don't have any logic yet to save the files and do anything else. All we're doing now is just receiving the data, and we are exposing it to a publisher that is listening to a topic. If that doesn't make sense, we'll make sure it does. So what I want to do now is just create another logic app, and just kind of utilize this as a connector. And I like to use conventions, again, like programmatically you can logically think of. So in this case, this specific logic is going to be, it has only one purpose: save weather file into a blog. Okay, so by naming the file conventions, right, the logic app name, again, you can put your organization if you need to, but I just want to keep this example simple as possible. So this one logic here has only one purpose, is to save the file into the blog storage. Okay, so to do that, right, let's go back to our resource group, and let me see if I can just go back to my topics. Let's see if I can see here. You see the file, the weather file, but let's go into our topics. Okay, and in here there's this section called event subscriptions. Okay, here, just something to keep in mind. Here's your endpoints, here's my topic, right, very important, right, and here's this end subscription. You can add a subscription, right. The subscription has to be related to the action or whatever you're trying to achieve. Again, this is very similar to what I just showed you with the logic app. So this subscription has one purpose, right? Save the file to the blog, and I'm going to use webhooks, just kind of indicator what the endpoint details are. Or perhaps we can just call it similar to subscriptions. That would make it more readable. And this makes it easier. Instead of having those hashable codes that I showed you earlier with the built-in functionality, this makes it more descriptive to what you're trying to achieve. Here I like to use my webhooks, and you essentially need a connection, right? So remember how I showed you how you can switch back here. This is what they're talking about. I need a connection to your topic, right? And the way to do that is by simply going to save file to weather. Let me go back here 1 second. So I want to create one here. we're doing a webhook. So for webhooks, we want to just have an exposed endpoint, right? So if I just do, this is going to be one purpose again, we're going to create a blog. So there's this connector you can use. And here you can say, I want to have a blog. This can be anything. Blog create or ingest, that sounds better. It's going to go to my ingest folder. And here, when I create the connection, the nice thing about Azure, it kind of gives you, a lot of user-friendly validations. Like here's my folder. A lot of the IntelliSense is kind of done for you. I am going to use an expression to auto-generate the file to a cool GUID expression, and I also will add an extension.json. That way we can, keep the data format as it's supposed to. And then what is the content? Well, I'm going to pass the body, right? So what's going to happen is that the topic, the subscription is going to be sending the data through this webhook. This is just one approach. You can use different approaches, right? But for this particular example, I need to use this endpoint. And once I saved it, right, I'm able to get this endpoint here. Let me close this guy here. Let me copy the endpoint. And this is because we're trying to do a webhook through the subscription. This is basically what they're asking for. Hey, give me the endpoint where you want me to publish the data that's coming through this topic, essentially. Pretty straightforward. So again, this is one way to instantly get data when another trigger gets exposed to this topic, right? When new data gets exposed here. So you can see here, you can click on it and you can get a good understanding of what's connected to. What I want to do now is go back to, let's go back to Postman. Let's see if we can go to Postman. Let me double check something real quick. I want to see if there's any activity here, right? Remember, we just created this logic, which is tied to the webhook. If I go back to Postman, right, if I hit send a couple of times, I'll be able to see if it's working, right? You can see I have two activities, and what just happened is as soon as the data hit the endpoint, is propagated a topic across all the subscriptions. In this case, I do have a subscription that is tied to the blog server storage, and it went into the ingest folder. So if you take a look at the ingest folder container, you can see the files that came in there. You can see the size of the files as well. That's my payload that it came from the weather. Really powerful. So what if we want to do this to other resources? Let me refresh here. Let me refresh. There you go. So I got 4 files now. Yeah, so in the example, the needs for this example, you can think of, how do I get my data across different resources? Every time I get new data, it's going to push new files into this container. So we got one more example. So we just know how to do one subscription. So you can kind of think of what I'm going to do next. What if we do the same for another data provider? What if we do some cubes, right? You can see here, I'm just going to create a new cube name. Let's call it ingest. It's just very similar to the storage, right? To the container, to the block container. So how do I add another subscription for this one? So any data provider that you want to push data to, just think of subscription. Okay. So let's do this again. It's very repeatable. So if you go back to the event, you go back to your topics. Remember how you did the subscription? Well, you can do the same here again. You want an event subscription. And instead of saving it to blog, right, we want to send it to a queue storage. This is all really depending how you're architecturing or what are the needs or what are the requirements. But just keep in mind that what you're doing is sending data across different data providers. So I do want to send this to a queue, so use the convention. This is much better than having those hashable values that you saw earlier. You set into your storage account. Again, Azure makes it a lot easier. Once you validated your subscription, you just click and go, pretty much. And here's my ingest queue that we created just a minute ago. So now you can see that you have another subscription, right, tied to a topic. Okay, so technically you have two subscriptions now. One is going to push data to a blog, and one is going to push data to your queue. It's very powerful. This is happening instantly. So as soon as you get data into the topic will push it to all the subscription resources. And you can continue doing this to other resources like SQL database or some other Cosmo DB. And then you can push the send data across different areas of the globe. So let's go back to Postman. Let's validate this one more last time. And if I send this data across, a couple times, let's see what happens, right? So let's go back to our resource. Let's see here. I'm sorry here. Let me look for. I want to go back to my storage, right? So refresh, right? I do want to go back to my storage, and I just want to demonstrate that what we just did was send data twice, right? And this instantly came to two different data resources, one for the blog and one for the ingest. Very powerful. Hope this small tutorial helped to have better understanding of how you can utilize ingest patterns, and you can take advantage of serverless without having to write a single line of code. Thank you very much, and have a great day.